Have you ever noticed that the more deeply you think, the more isolated you feel? Like the more you try to understand the world, the less the world seems to want to understand you. It's not just you. History shows us time and time again that society has always struggled to embrace deep thinkers. Not because they were wrong, but because they saw what others didn't want to. From Socrates to Galileo, from Tesla to Nietzsche. Brilliant minds have been laughed at, shut down, or outright ignored. Not because they lacked truth, but because their truth made people uncomfortable. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most brutally honest philosophers of all time, believed that intelligence wasn't a blessing, but a curse. A force that the more powerful it was, the more it separated you from the people around you. But why? Why does thinking deeply often lead to feeling alone? It has everything to do with how the human mind and ego works. Let's break it down. When you stand next to someone physically strong, you might admire them. You don't feel attacked, you just notice their strength. If you meet someone who's rich, you might feel envy, sure, but again, you don't feel like they're attacking your identity. But when you come face to face with someone who is intellectually sharp, someone who sees the world more clearly, who questions assumptions you never even noticed, you had something shifts. It's uncomfortable. Psychologists call this the mirror effect. Deep thinkers don't just bring in new ideas, they reflect back the limitations of the people around them. And that's not something people forgive easily. Even if the thinker says nothing, their presence alone can make others feel exposed, insecure, deficient. Why? Because intelligence doesn't operate like strength or money. It's not external. It hits deep. Our thoughts, our beliefs are wrapped into our identity. When someone questions them or even just presents a deeper version of them, it can feel like a threat. So instead of admiring intelligence, many people resist it. Not because the thinker is arrogant, but because their presence alone forces others to see their own blind spots. And most people, they don't want that mirror. This is why throughout history, deep thinkers haven't just been misunderstood, they've been pushed away. Not because their ideas are dangerous, but because their ideas make egos uncomfortable. Now think about your own life. Have you ever tried to bring up a deep idea in a casual conversation, only to be met with blank stares or changed the subject quickly, or even laughed off? It's not just bad timing. It's a defense mechanism. Most people, when faced with depth, will retreat. Instead of engaging, they'll resist. Instead of being curious, they'll shut it down. That's why so many intellectuals, visionaries, and critical thinkers end up feeling isolated. Not because they want to be alone, but because society in a way makes them alone. Even more interesting studies show that in social settings, confidence is often valued more than intelligence. People are naturally drawn to those who speak with certainty, even if what they're saying is shallow. That's why you see charismatic influencers go viral with feel-good cliches, while brilliant thinkers who speak in nuance and complexity often get ignored. This is the paradox of intelligence. The more you seek truth, the more disconnected you often become from the mainstream. The mirror effect doesn't just reflect society's discomfort. It explains why society is so slow to change. And if all of this feels hard to believe, there's neuroscience to back it up. Modern brain scans show that when people feel intellectually inferior, their amygdala, the brain's fear center, lights up. In other words, being around someone smarter doesn't just feel awkward. It feels dangerous. Your brain treats it like a threat, just like it would if you were face to face with a wild animal. But why? Because for most of human history, the key to survival wasn't being the smartest. It was being part of the tribe. Back then, being accepted meant being safe. Being rejected meant being alone, and alone meant death. So our brains evolved to prioritize belonging over truth, to choose comfort over challenge, to protect the group, not rock the boat. So what happens when someone walks into a social setting and starts asking hard questions, when someone introduces new ideas that challenge the group's norms? It disrupts the balance. It doesn't feel like curiosity. It feels like a threat. And this happens most in groups. A 2021 Stanford study found that when people interact with an intellectual one-on-one, they often feel curious, even inspired. But in a group setting, that same deep thinker becomes a target. Because now it's not just about ideas, it's about status. People aren't just reacting to intelligence, they're reacting to how that intelligence makes them look in front of others. If they feel outshined, they might try to tear the thinker down. Not out of logic, but out of fear of losing social standing. This is why deep thinkers often have better conversations in private, but struggle in larger social environments. In groups, the stakes are higher, the social dynamics more fragile, and there are psychological biases that make this even worse. First, there's the Dunning-Kruger effect. People with low ability tend to overestimate their intelligence. Meanwhile, highly intelligent people tend to doubt themselves. That means people who know less often believe they know more and dismiss those who actually think deeply. Then there's status quo bias, the brain's preference for familiar ideas. Intelligence introduces complex, unfamiliar truths, and people hate that. They want comfort, not disruption. And don't forget the backfire effect. When people are shown information that challenges their beliefs, they don't become more open. They become more stubborn. They double down. So when a deep thinker introduces a complex or uncomfortable idea, it doesn't open minds. It often triggers defense. And in today's world, things have only gotten worse. On social media, it's not the thoughtful, nuanced content that spreads. It's the catchy, controversial, emotionally charged sound bites. Algorithms reward engagement, not depth. So people who reduce ideas into simple emotional statements get the most attention. And the more intellectual you are, the harder it is to do that. Because real thinking isn't fast. It's not flashy. It's layered. So while deep thinkers are asking, what does this mean? The rest of the internet is asking. Will this go viral? Society is moving faster, but thinking less, and that makes it even harder for deep thinkers to find space. So what's the takeaway? The resistance to intelligence isn't just social. It's biological, it's psychological, it's cultural. But that doesn't mean deep thinkers should stop thinking. It just means they have to understand the forces working against them. And that's exactly what we'll dive into next. So if intelligence causes this much resistance, social, biological, even neurological, then what does society actually value? One word: comfort. It prefers predictability over truth, stability over change. Most people don't want to be challenged, they want to feel right. They want to feel safe. And for a society built on tradition, repetition, and consensus, deep thinkers are often seen as a disruption to that safety. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this long before neuroscience could explain it. He didn't romanticize intelligence as a blessing. In fact, he called it a curse. Schopenhauer believed that the smarter someone is, the harder it becomes for them to connect with the world. And not because they don't want connection, but because they start to see through everything. They see through small talk. They see through manipulation, illusions, distractions. They see through the systems, the games, the masks that everyone else has accepted as normal. Schopenhauer's entire philosophy revolved around a concept he called the will. It's the irrational force that drives most of human behavior. And according to him, most people live under the control of the will to live, which means they seek pleasure, comfort, and survival at all costs. But deep thinkers, they're ruled by something else: the will to truth. They're driven by the need to understand, even if what they find is painful, uncomfortable, or isolating. This creates a fundamental divide. Most people seek happiness. Deep thinkers seek meaning. Most people chase pleasure. Deep thinkers chase truth even if that truth hurts. And that's where the disconnection begins. Where most people find joy in routine entertainment and surface-level relationships, deep thinkers often feel detached. They look at those things and see a kind of emptiness, a distraction from the bigger questions. They don't just want connection, they want authenticity, they want honesty, depth, purpose. And that kind of conversation, that kind of life, it doesn't fit easily into everyday society. Schopenhauer wrote that the more someone understands human nature, the harder it becomes for them to relate to others. Not because they don't care, but because they see the cracks in everything. They see the lies that hold conversations together. They see the hidden motives in interactions. They see how much of daily life is built on performance. And when you can see the performance, it's really hard to keep clapping. You start asking deeper questions. Why do people chase money they'll never spend? Why do they cling to relationships that keep them small? Why do they work jobs they hate to buy things they don't need? You start to wonder, is anyone actually living, or are most people just surviving in style? And that line of thought, it doesn't make you popular at parties. Most people don't want to talk about mortality, morality, or meaning. They want to talk about the weather, their weekend, the latest trend. But if you're wired for depth, that kind of small talk feels like screaming into a pillow. It feels like betrayal, like you're shrinking yourself to be accepted, so you withdraw. Not because you hate people, but because the conversations around you feel like noise. That's why intelligent people are often labeled as aloof or arrogant or cold. It's not arrogance, it's exhaustion. Because performing takes energy, pretending takes effort. And when you crave truth, fake connection becomes unbearable. Schopenhauer believed that this disconnect isn't something to be fixed, it's something to be understood. He didn't suggest deep thinkers force themselves to fit in. He offered a different path. Embrace solitude, not as isolation, not as punishment, but as freedom. Use your solitude for thinking, creating, building. Let it be the soil where your ideas take root. He believed that solitude was where the deepest parts of your mind could finally breathe. Second, find your tribe. Not everyone will understand you, but a few people will. You might not find them in your hometown, or your office, or your school. But they exist in books, in online communities, in shared philosophies. Find those who speak your language, even if it's rare. Third, engage wisely. Don't waste your insights on people who aren't ready to hear them. Not every room deserves your depth. Some people need time to be ready. Others never will be. And that's okay. You don't have to explain yourself to everyone. Your thoughts aren't less valuable because they don't get applause. Schopenhauer said, "A high degree of intellect tends to make a man unsocial, because the more you understand, the harder it becomes to ignore. And the harder it is to ignore, the lonelier the path becomes." But loneliness isn't failure. Sometimes it's proof that you're seeing clearly. The more you awaken, the more you step outside the crowd. But with that distance comes freedom. And with freedom comes clarity. You start to see that you were never really alone. You were just ahead of your time. And that's the truth behind so many of history's greatest minds. They weren't misunderstood because they were wrong. They were misunderstood because they were right too soon. People like Socrates, Galileo, Nietzsche, Tesla, they were all pushed to the fringes. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because their insights made people uncomfortable. And here's the irony. Society does value intelligence, but only once it's safe, only once it's dead. Sanitized, packaged in a quote on a coffee mug. When the thinker is no longer a threat, the world finally calls them a genius. But during their lifetime, they're inconvenient. They're rejected. They're ignored. So if you're feeling that same resistance now, if your thoughts seem to push people away instead of drawing them closer, understand this. You're not broken. You're not too much. You're not wrong. You're just seeing the world a little more clearly than most are ready for. And in part 3, we're going to explore exactly how those great minds navigated that rejection, what they did with their loneliness, and how you can move forward with your depth even in a world that doesn't always understand it. So what can you do when your depth isolates you? When you feel like the more you see, the more invisible you become? Well, you're not the first. Throughout history, some of the most brilliant minds, Socrates, Galileo, Tesla, Nietzsche, Hypatia, faced the same resistance. They were ridiculed, rejected, or outright destroyed. Not because they were wrong, but because they were right too early. Let's start with Socrates. He spent his life asking uncomfortable questions. He challenged people to think, to reflect, to question everything. He didn't flatter, he exposed. And for that, he was sentenced to death. His crime corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods, but his real offense was shaking the foundations of thought. And even when given the chance to escape, he chose death drinking poison rather than betraying his beliefs. His last words still echo, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Then there's Galileo. He looked through a telescope and saw the truth: the earth revolves around the sun. But that shattered centuries of religious belief and threatened the power of the church. So what did they do? They forced him to deny his discovery. They locked him in his home for the rest of his life. Today, we honor him as one of the greatest scientists to ever live. But in his time, he was a heretic. Nietzsche was dismissed as insane. His work was too intense, too uncomfortable. He challenged morality, religion, society itself, and people weren't ready. But now his ideas are at the core of modern philosophy, literature, psychology. He wasn't wrong. He was early. Tesla gave us alternating current radio wireless energy. He envisioned a world of free energy, but his ideas didn't fit the agenda of the powerful. Industrialists and businessmen saw him as a threat because they couldn't profit off free electricity, so they shut him down. Tesla died alone in a hotel room, forgotten, while others built empires using his stolen innovations. Alan Turing cracked Nazi codes, saved millions of lives, and laid the groundwork for computers and AI. But because he was gay, he was chemically castrated by his own government. He died by suicide. Now he's a national hero. Back then he was discarded. And let's not forget Hypatia, one of the first known female philosophers. In a time dominated by religious dogma and male power, she taught science and reason. That made her dangerous. She was dragged from her carriage by a mob and murdered. Why? Because truth in the wrong hands is a threat. All of these stories have one thing in common. They weren't rejected because they failed. They were rejected because they revealed. They exposed cracks in the system, and people don't like having their illusions taken away. Society doesn't fear intelligence. It fears what intelligence reveals, and that fear is why it resists. But here's the paradox: those same thinkers once feared become the foundation of our progress. So where does that leave you? If you've ever felt like your thoughts are too much, if you've ever been told to stop overthinking, if people change the subject when you speak from depth, you are not alone. You're part of a lineage of thinkers not broken, but ahead. The good news: you don't need the world to understand you. You just need a few who do. Here's what modern deep thinkers can do to stay whole in a shallow world. 1. Choose your audience wisely. Not everyone deserves your deepest thoughts. Not every room can hold your truth. Save your insight for people who seek it, who value it. Don't try to force wisdom where it's not wanted. Instead, plant seeds. Speak gently. Observe deeply. 2. Find your community. It might be small. It might be quiet. But it's out there. In books, in forums, in podcasts, in thinkers who share your hunger for understanding. The right minds might not be close in space, but they're close in spirit. 3. Learn to communicate with clarity. Einstein once said, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." As a deep thinker, your ideas matter, but they're only as useful as they are understandable. Sharpen your expression. Translate your complexity without watering it down. Meet people where they are that then invite them deeper. 4. Protect your solitude. Solitude isn't loneliness, it's your sanctuary, your workshop, your inner lab. Use it to think, to write, to process. Let it refine you. 5. Accept misunderstanding as a price for clarity. You will be misread. You will be called arrogant, intense, strange. Let them talk. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to see. As Schopenhauer said, talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see. That's who you are. You see things others don't. You ask questions others avoid. You feel truths others fear. And that's not a flaw. That's your function. Society doesn't always reward deep thinking in the moment, but deep thinking shapes the future. So no, you're not broken. You're not too much. You're just one of the few asking real questions in a world addicted to easy answers. Keep going. And if this video spoke to something in you, something raw, something real, drop a comment. I see the world differently. Let's find each other. Let's build a space where deep minds don't have to shrink, where the mirror isn't feared but welcomed. And if you're ready to keep thinking deeply, subscribe, because we're just getting started. See you in the next one.